Welcome to NextLabs Expert Q&A Series. This series was designed to inform you of relevant cybersecurity topics via expert knowledge.
Welcome back to the NextLabs Cybersecurity Expert Series. In this episode, expert Shruti Kulkarni will cover open source software security. Shruti is a cybersecurity architect at 6.6. Now, Shruti will introduce herself before we move into the questions.
I'm Shruti Kulkarni. I'm a cybersecurity architect with 6.6. I have experience working with security standards like ISO 27001 and PCI DSS. I've worked with policies, standards, security tools, threat modeling, and risk assessments. I work on security strategies and collaborate with cross-functional groups to implement information security controls in software development lifecycle, service operations, service delivery, such that security controls support business requirements.
Thank you for your introduction, Shruti. Now let's move into the first question. What is open source software?
So, going by authoritative sources, and using NIST. NIST defines open source software as software that can be accessed, used, modified, and shared by anyone. Open source software is often distributed under licenses that comply with the definition of open source provided by the Open Source Initiative and/or that meet the definition of free software provided by the Free Software Foundation.
Excellent answer, Shruti. Now let's move to question 2. Are there cybersecurity risks and other vulnerabilities when using open source software?
I'm glad you asked this question. Yes, like any other software, open source code has vulnerabilities, and like any other software, can lack updates when the creator or the contributors cease development. So the risks of using open source software is the same as risk of using any other software. Open source code gives a lot of freedom and expression of creativity, but the security of open source software is as much a consumer's responsibility as it is of a supplier's responsibility. So use open source software in an informed and secure way.
Great, excellent answer, Shruti. Question 3. Does using open source software pose a risk to an organization's supply chain?
Okay, taking a step back over here, the supply chain risk is posed when a particular component is consumed by an intermediary component, which is then consumed by an end user. So going by that, open source software often get included in commercial packages. For example, a software as a service using Tomcat or Apache web servers. And open source software also get included in other open source packages like, for example, Python is built using C programming language. So because of which, attackers can scan applications to discover open source software with known vulnerabilities. A malicious package or open source software may make its way to the repository, for example, typo squatting, where there is less of control or lack of governance gates, attackers may inject malicious code or backdoors. And also, of course, using default settings in open source software could lead to increase in risk of an exploit. Open source software, like any other software, may have zero-day vulnerabilities. So when any open source software with any of these manifestations get included in another open software, be it open source or proprietary, it results into supply chain risk.
Thanks for the insight, Shruti. Now for question 4. What is your view on the following statement? Anybody can modify the code of any open source software. Because of this, malicious actors can exploit vulnerabilities of open source software.
Well, here is where it gets tricky. Open source software is based on licensing. Some licensing require that the source code be made available when the license material is distributed. Some do not. So contributions to some open source software is by grant of access to source code. So to summarize, Not everybody can make changes to the source code of any open source software that is distributed to end users. However, because one can download the source code of any open source software, vulnerabilities can be discovered. And so if a vulnerability is present in an open source software, it gives an easy attack path for the malicious actor to exploit the vulnerability. Not that the exploit will definitely take place, but that the probability of the exploit taking place is higher.
Good answer, Shruti. Moving on to question 5. What are some do's and don'ts an organization can implement to reduce risks when using open source software?
To reduce the risk of using open source software, please note that I have used the word reduce and not eliminate. You can eliminate the risk of using open source software by not using open source software at all. But if you use, you can reduce the risk by following a secure software development lifecycle process. Secure software development lifecycle is a very wide topic in its own, but there are some relevant activities that you can follow to ensure that the risks of using any software is reduced. So one of them is to scan the source code using a static code analysis tool, or what is popularly known as SAST. And the other one is scanning the final product using a dynamic analysis tool or a DAST. So both these scannings address security in the code and security of the development of the final product that is being shipped to production. Also, there is another way you can ensure that you can reduce the risks of using open source software, that is by scanning applications for vulnerabilities on a regular basis. So I don't mean the static code analysis or dynamic analysis of applications that are in development or test environment. I mean scanning the applications that are in production, and those should be scanned on a regular basis. So any zero-day vulnerability can be identified. Also, as a good practice, it is always good to check for any reported vulnerabilities or exploits in vulnerability disclosure management systems like CVE database or ExploitDB. So in order to reduce the risks or any supply chain risks using open source software, use signed binaries or packages, reference private feeds, use controlled scopes, and lock your files. So to reduce the chance of using any vulnerable components, where possible, use version pinning and integrity verifications, and monitor for deprecated packages, because deprecated packages may sometimes contain vulnerabilities. Also use dependency graphs to understand whether the components, the software, open source software that you're using, contain any other vulnerable components. And where possible, use secure configuration, and of course scan for any embedded secrets, because embedded secrets allow backdoors into your applications.
Excellent. Thank you, Shruti. That brings us to the end of this episode of the NextLabs Cybersecurity Expert Series. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to the NextLabs YouTube channel, and stay tuned for more videos. Thank you.